Hello, and welcome to Raising the Bar with the MBBA. I'm your co-host, Adeola Adejobi.
And I'm Jason Clark, president of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association. For those of you who aren't familiar with our organization, the Metropolitan Black Bar Association is the largest association of predominantly African American attorneys in New York. Our goal is to advance equality in the pursuit of justice, assist in the professional development of our members, and address legal issues affecting New Yorkers.
The goal of Raising the Bar with the MBBA is to foster a substantive conversation about justice issues in our community and to try to identify a couple of solutions in the process.
Today, we're going to talk about issues of diversity in the New York City public school education system, especially with specialized high schools. Joining us now is Dr. Ivan Khan, CEO of Khan Sartorial. Ivan, welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, everyone.
Mm-hmm. There's been an issue when it comes to diversity with the specialized high schools here in New York. Mm-hmm. I know that some of the most recent numbers came out. If my memory serves me correctly, even though 68% of all public school education students are Black and Latino, less than 11% were accepted into specialized high schools. Mm-hmm. And these are schools such as Stuyvesant, such as Brooklyn Tech, such as Bronx Science. Right. Can you tell us a little bit about the state of events when it comes to specialized high schools and diversity and, just where we are now?
Well, clearly this has been a hot topic issue for at least the last few years. The fact that only 10 to 11% of Black and Latino students are earning offers to these schools poses the deep question, why is this happening? Is something wrong with the way the system is created? Is it at the high school entry level? Does that journey start well before that? As a New York City public school student my whole life and a graduate of one of these schools, I had a chance to, be a part of this system of underfunded schools, whether I was in Elmhurst or Corona, Queens, going to second grade in a trailer in the schoolyard, or having to figure out which junior high schools offered a good program for whatever concentration I was interested in. So when I was growing up in the late 80s and early 90s, every single school had something called SP, IGC.
Right, I remember that.
So you had all the students in any school, no matter how diverse that neighborhood was. You pretty much saw that in every classroom. And they took the top performing kids and they placed them in the best class, so to speak. None of us had to take an exam. None of us were forced to prepare for anything. It was just, hey, who was working harder when compared to the peers? Over time, those types of programs became phased out, unfortunately. And today we're at a very, very tragic point where, in especially underfunded districts, about 25% of Black and Latino students are grade level proficient. That means they're on par with those in that particular grade for reading and math. If you combine that 25% with the fact that only 44% of Black and Latino students are even sitting to apply to the specialized high schools, we're going to get an abysmal 10 to 11% of applicants and offers, whereas it should be much higher. So those are some problem areas that I've lived through myself. During the week, I work in underserved communities, Black, Hispanic, new immigrant communities for folks from South Asia, Bangladesh particularly. And we see this in our students and families' lives every single week. And having been a product of that, it's something that we're tackling on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit more broadly about the New York City public school system for those who might not be familiar?
Absolutely. Well, the New York City public school system is one of the largest in the country with 1.1 million people.
Goodness.
That's double the size of some major cities in the U.S. So with 1.1 million students, we have students that are dealing with homelessness, to everything from some of the wealthiest kids. So you have this big spectrum of economic disparity. You also have a deep segregation from an early age, and that's something that a lot of council members, a lot of state legislatures are working on from an earlier age. I'm very, very supportive of having integrated classrooms from K through 2. And that can often mean zip codes, districts becoming broader. That could mean greater investments in our transportation for students from all communities to be able to go to schools together from an early age. One of the things I'm very, very deeply supportive of is ensuring that there's these old school SP, IGC options for accelerated learners, not with involving a standardized test for a 4-year-old. Specialized high school, that's a whole separate conversation I'd love to address in a few, but there's a huge opportunity for us to fix the K-8 system, particularly in Black and Latinx neighborhoods, and that's something that we'd love to see happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like, I'm sorry, and actually to fully set the table, can you discuss the admissions process of getting in specialized high school?
So, we've just spoken about K-8, and right now, once students in New York City are reaching 7th, 8th grade in middle school, they're looking at high school options. And there are about 417 to 440 high schools across New York City. 8 of them that are technically called specialized high schools that require an exam. There are at least 10 or 15 top screen schools that require multiple criteria. And there are other schools that focus on particular concentrations. And what you'll see is that the specialized high schools, when you compare it to top screen schools, specialized high schools oftentimes have a higher number of minority students, oftentimes have higher merit, and oftentimes have far less wealth. When you take in the holistic admissions of an interview process, they're looking at attendance, they're looking at GPA. Oftentimes those schools have these formulas baked in where they end up becoming much more, less minorities with a far greater white population, a far greater wealthy population. So I think if the cream of the crop of high schools is these 8 specialized high schools and these 15 screen schools, that leaves 400 other high schools out of the conversation. And I think that's where the conversation should be to fixing the entire system rather than focusing on these specialized high schools alone. And it's important to focus on the specialized high schools because we're involved in diversity efforts for these specialized high schools. However, the entire high school system should be deeply examined if we're going to have this conversation.
Right, and so as you talk about, lack of money and opportunities and things like that, which is basically kind of baked into this criteria, for the parents that are not familiar, where can they go to kind of see what some of the criteria is if they would like their children to at least be able to compete to get into one of these schools?
Fantastic. The best place that folks can start is where we all start, online, on Google. You can just type in specialized high school scholarships. Hopefully the scholarships that our company has done for the past 5 years, we've been giving out 50 scholarship seats at our prep company to ensure that we increase that number. Last year we had nearly 40 Black and Hispanic children get into the specialized high schools thanks to partnerships in Harlem with Dream Chasers, in North Brooklyn with Brooklyn Tech. So there are an increasing number of community-based options. Right. New York City has its own program that's free. It's called Dream. And it's really, really important that parents and school administrators are supportive and part of the process. Way too often I've visited Black and Hispanic schools to give schools that are predominantly Black and Hispanic children and families to talk about the specialized high schools and awareness and options. And oftentimes I was invited after the registration deadline. So when I'm there with 6th graders, 7th graders, and 8th graders, and I have Black and Latinx 8th graders looking at me like, hey, why am I having this conversation now? Your presentation says the deadline was 2 weeks ago. It puts everyone in a really, really bad spot. And it's really important that awareness starts in the 6th grade, in the 7th grade, to understand where you are, not compared to getting into specialized high school, but where you are in the entire academic system performance-wise. Will your grades help you get into a top place? And if we have that gap, what can we do to close it? Hopefully for free, because those free options are out there increasingly.
Right, and so you said that 6th grade is the time that people need to really start paying attention. When is it the registration deadline generally?
The registration deadline for the specialized high schools is in the beginning of 8th grade. Okay. That's it. However, we urge all New York City 6th graders to start exploring options for high school because 7th grade is when all the work, you got to put in all the work in 7th grade to have your 9th grade spot. So if you're looking to go to a testing school like a specialized high school, you can pretty much use your 7th grade practicing from books, a couple hours on the weekend. And our students at Cons, they do 4 hours once a week for the majority of the 7th grade.
Yeah.
And right before the 8th grade starts over that summer, we ramp it up and increase it to 2 to 3 days and 2 to 3 hours of practice. And oftentimes, that practice is not as necessary if you're from a privileged district. There's a lot of disparity in the way our districts are funded. Black and Latinx students are not getting proper support in the number of counselors, school counselors, guidance counselors, social workers, PSAL athletics, music and arts. Whenever we have all of these amazing, amazing supportive aspects that need to be part of childhood education, when the funding comes out, you see the privileged districts get the heavier bulk of the money, and it's usually immigrants like myself, Black and Latinx communities that are on the shorter end of that distribution of wealth. Yeah. And there's not enough transparency in the way the DOE money is being spent, and that's not even counting the $2+ billion that New York City school children have been owed by the state over the past 10, 15 years.
Right. And so can you also give your website for those who are interested in finding out?
Absolutely. Our website is constitutorial.com. And I really appreciate this conversation because constitutorial.com and if you look in the scholarship tab, there are active scholarships for the 6th graders for 6th graders finishing 6th grade right now to find out about the process. We have had support from junior high schools is so critical to the application process. And oftentimes we don't see enough support from the DOE middle schools to get the application to the hands of bright, dynamic Black and Hispanic children. For a program that we do in Harlem, for example, for high schools that are grade 7 through 12, the guidance counselors in those high schools discourage top-performing Black and Hispanic children from leaving their own school system. Oh, you don't want to go to Stuyvesant. Those schools aren't for you. You want to stay in our school because they don't want to lose that top kid. They want to improve their own stats. So students oftentimes are not getting, they're not getting the best information. Oftentimes the information is biased. And I'm a child of 2 UFT teachers. I'm a child of an assistant principal. My dad's taught in Wingate High School in Brooklyn. He's been assistant principal in Harlem. So my family, we've had experiences working with every single New York City community imaginable. So these are things I've seen not only as an educator myself, but as a child of educators.
Yeah, so to just kind of put this whole conversation into a little bit of context, I've actually known Ivan for about going on almost 25 years.
Oh, wow.
We met, I guess, my freshman year when I was attending Bronx Science. We both went to high school together, one of the specialized high schools. And I guess we reconnected a few years ago, and that's basically when we were going back to Bronx Science, and then just seeing firsthand how few individuals from Latinx and from African American communities who were at that school. I mean, I know when I went there, it was maybe I would ballpark it somewhere maybe around 20%.
15-20%.
Yeah,
Black
something
and
like
Hispanic
that.
From our years.
See?
Yeah.
There we go. And I always felt like there could be more, but I at least felt like there was
a community.
Folks. There was a community there, but it really seemed like it was it wasn't that anymore. And because of that, we actually started working on a project together outside of this one that Ivan had mentioned called Dream Chasers. And the idea is to be able to provide people, incorporate some of those scholarships that I was talking about and make sure people in a lot of our communities are having opportunities to be able to get in these specialized high schools. Because it just seems like so much the conversation has changed into, are we supposed to get the best and the brightest into the schools, or is it supposed to be reflective of everybody in New York? And our idea and our thought is that it could be both. It could be both. Yeah. But if you have to make sure that people have the resources early. And I'm going to take a point of privilege and just mention, I know at least with Ivan, I think 385 or 386 kids got into specialized high schools who came from Constitutorial.
40 of whom which were from our partnerships with Dream Chasers and that were Black and Hispanic through our scholarships and partnerships going.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and just the idea that I thought, after this whole long soliloquy, maybe I'll go back to a question, but the idea is that, today, even more than I even think when I was, when we were applying to specialized high schools, it's so important that people start preparing early. You know, there's so many people who look at going to one of these specialized high schools as their opportunity to be able to escape poverty, you know, be able to have a better life for themselves. And now it's almost like the SAT, where people don't just show up for the most part. I mean, obviously some folks can, but like most people don't show up and just take the exam. They started preparing a month or 2 months ahead of time, and then 6 months, and then a couple of years. And you would know this better than I, but it seems like nowadays you have to have been preparing at least a year to really have a legitimate shot to be able to get in there. And if you're in communities where those opportunities aren't there, or to some of the points that I was mentioned earlier, where you're already in an underperforming school district, then you're already behind the curve in trying to get up there. So a lot of what we're talking about, what I'd like to even talk a little bit more and hear your thoughts on, are just different ways that we can make sure that people who are living in underperforming school districts have opportunities to be able to get in these schools, even if they can't afford.
It has to be a goal of the school system. Right. And right now, the school system's priorities aren't really focused on academic metrics as much as other metrics, which are important, but we would love to see both. And reintroducing and spreading out SP and IGC in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods is one of the most important ways that high-achieving students from every single school can be identified. Secondly, why are we only focusing on the high-achieving Black and Hispanic students? What can we do to ensure all the students who are at 1s and 2s can be helped and supported, so the grade level proficiency levels?
1s and 2s when they
1s and 2s out of 4.
Right.
So if you're a 3rd grader, at the end of the year, you take 1 math exam and 1 ELA exam just to see how well you fare with the rest of the state,
right,
how well you fare with the rest of your school, how well you fare with the rest of the district, how well you may fare with, if you're a public school student, against a charter school student who have different types of support built in. So when we look at that, that's when we're seeing, that's when it's really revealing, oh my gosh, we're not giving kids the adequate support to be high-achieving learners. Right. And we don't want to leave so many kids behind having 1s and 2s that are not meeting grade level or so behind. So we'd love to, when I speak about starting early, it's not starting test prep early so we can get into Stuyvesant and Bronx Science. It's to ensure that we can raise the bar, just like the show's called, to ensure that grade level proficiency is something that we're all striving for every single child. And if we can do that, it may take a 5 to 7 year journey, but if we invest that in the early K through 6 pipeline, by the time we're having this conversation in 5 years, we're going to get closer and closer to the actual representation of this amazing city.
And that's just such an important point, because, you know, we hear every year and we about the folks or the disparities when it comes to people getting into specialized high schools. And yes, that's an issue in itself, but I think what it really is indicative of the lack of performance, you know, at a lot of our schools. And that's what we were talking about, figuring out ways that we could be able to improve the system. I mean, you even mentioned the ISP, and there was another acronym too.
It's like SP was Special Progress.
Right.
So IGC, they had these silly acronyms,
right, so
and it's like
talented and gifted programs.
Yeah, and over time, talented and gifted has kind of had a makeover.
Right.
And what they did was they took away these amazing programs that really capture the student as a whole, as you know, as through their drive, their work ethic, and even their creative abilities, and it got replaced by these IQ exams or these puzzle-based exams for 4-year-olds, and even when you had Black, Hispanic, and low-income Asian children perform well, only 10% of students who were applicable or eligible received seats, because there was a lack of seats, so everyone had to enter a lottery after you became eligible. So it became further chaotic and further confusing parents in working class neighborhoods. So I'd love to see them do away with that system for 4-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds, and go back to what we had of teachers identifying. And if you have it in every single school, you're not only going to end up choosing white and Asian kids. You're going to be able to choose the best and the brightest from every single African American, Latinx, low-income Asian, South Asian, any neck of the woods that end up in New York City Public Schools.
And so, New York City is a very metropolitan area, and you have people moving in from different countries, from different states, and things like that. And because there's so much going on, I think it's hard to kind of understand the overall picture. So, could you just kind of frame the overall picture of like what the schools are? There's charter schools, there's public schools, there's specialized schools, and things like that, so people have a better understanding.
Tell us about the whole education
Not
system.
the whole
So
system.
besides the
Yeah.
1.1,
It is,
besides 1.1 million, we got 5 boroughs, and like every single borough kind of has its identity for the way they are approaching the school system based on the makeup of that borough and all the changes that are happening in each borough. So, and within each borough, we still have deep levels of disparity and underfunding. So, you have the public school system, which is 1.1 million people. You have these 5 boroughs. You have great economic diversity and racial diversity where folks are moving into new neighborhoods. So we have gentrification happening in a lot of neighborhoods that are creating a great mix of diversity in the classrooms. However, it's also pricing populations out. New immigrants, Black and Hispanic communities are being displaced out of their homes due to rapidly changing neighborhoods. So as an educator, you don't want to see those forces work against culturally relevant education, work against classroom sizes. We still want to keep our classroom sizes as manageable as possible. We want to have not only great diversity of ethnic backgrounds, but also economic backgrounds, so folks can really share their experiences, a lot of which we enjoyed at our high school experience.
Right.
So to really navigate that, it's complicated. And, and it's a tough job, and it's not a job for a single mayor or a chancellor to figure out. It's really a job that communities can lead and make those choices more and more for themselves.
Yeah, and I guess piggybacking off of allowing communities to lead, how can parents really get involved in pushing, forward what they really, all parents want their kids to have an amazing education, right? So how do they get involved? Where should they be going? Who should they be talking to?
I wish I knew. I mean, as a dad of 2 kids, that's 6 years old and 4 years old, you got to start with the school. Start with like the closest touch point, which is your child's actual school. Every single school has a PTA, Parent-Teacher Association. We absolutely encourage every single parent to attend the meetings. If there's a $10 membership fee or $5, if it's free, just figure out a way to make your voice heard and be at the schools. If there's report card night, we can't skip it. We have, and this is something I have a challenge with in my own ethnic community. We have a lot of language barriers, we have a lot of anxiety, we have a lot of Islamophobia, where parents don't have that courage to deal with the system. The system hasn't been kind to Muslim low-income New Yorkers in many ways, and we have a lot of skepticism about facing and having those conversations. So we've actually had the administration of Stuyvesant High School break those barriers, come into Jackson Heights, Queens, one of the most diverse communities, for a Bengali orientation or for high school moms to understand the college admissions process. I would love to see our dentist's office having conversations around education. Because when you're a kid, you always go to the pediatrician. I would love to see our emergency room physicians get a little bit of background on the school options so they can do that quick extra check-in. Hey, how's school going? Even during a trip to the ER for your kid's asthma. And hopefully kids aren't going to the ER as much for asthma and they're going to their primary care physician. So we'd really need to have a community, cross-collaboration effort between the local hospitals, pediatrics, dentists, teachers, parks, anywhere where kids and families spend time. And it's not just to talk about academics. You got to keep the arts in there. You got to keep music and sports and fun in there, because as a kid, you want to include those things to make it fun. And that's something that I really picked up from working with Jason and his colleagues at Dream Chasers. The mentorship aspect that you guys introduced, but taking our kids to see Endgame and Black Panther last year. And my community of Bangladeshi folks, we don't have our own superheroes depicted on the big screen yet. However, it's so important for us to learn and appreciate this extra mentorship. I mean, Bangladeshi immigrant kids, we didn't grow up going to the movies because we couldn't afford it. We didn't grow up having cable because we couldn't afford it. So we're really, really learning best practices from Jason and his colleagues, the Dream Chasers, to instill, improve our mentorship practices and expose our kids to, more fun things that all kids should get a chance to have.
But at least I know for our program, I mean, we wanted to make sure that, people had that time, where they were, preparing to take the exam. They had adequate time for that. But we also incorporated that mentorship part. We make sure that they go over to, visit some of the schools. And the idea behind that is that we just want to make sure that folks who are preparing for these, for this opportunity, recognize that it's not just about, studying, while that's obviously a part of it, but it's about, a mindset. It's about realizing that you can be able to do this and then putting together a community. Like one of the things that, made me so happy about the program is when one of the kids told me that they put together their own little group me, and this is, group me's I now have been around a little while, but just the idea that they're getting together and they're taking ownership of it, all right, this is my future, what am I going to do about that? And I think that just way too often, when you're constantly having to deal with, issues at your school, when you're constantly being told, maybe not necessarily explicitly, but indirectly that you're not good enough, that there has to be a rejuvenation of people realizing first that, yes, I can do this. And then from there, all right, now tell me how to do it.
Right.
And you got to get that first part first, and then you get it through. So.
Exactly. And that's all the time we have.
Yes. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching Raising the Bar with the MBBA on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network.
See you next time.